Document. Part 1. The stars glittered like scattered diamonds against the endless black canvas of space. Jack Wilson floated silently in his small spacecraft, the hum of its systems providing a comforting background noise. He was no astronaut, no hero from the stories people told back on Earth. He was just an engineer, a man who fixed things. His job was simple: repair satellites, keep communication lines open, and make sure everything ran smoothly. This mission was supposed to be routine, just another day at work. Jack adjusted his gloves as he prepared to step outside the craft for the repair. The satellite he was fixing hung in the void, its blinking lights signaling distress. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old piece of equipment that had seen better days. But it was important enough to warrant sending someone out here. He double-checked the tether connecting him to the ship, ensuring it was secure before opening the hatch. The cold vacuum of space greeted him, silent and vast. As he worked, Jack couldn't help but marvel at the view. Earth was far behind him now, a distant blue dot surrounded by swirling clouds. Somewhere down there, life went on without him. People woke up, went to work, ate meals, laughed, argued, all while he drifted alone in this endless expanse. Sometimes it made him feel small. Other times, it filled him with wonder. But today, something felt ... off. It started with a faint tremor running through the spacecraft. At first, Jack thought it was nothing, just a minor malfunction, maybe a loose bolt rattling around inside the hull. But then the tremors grew stronger, shaking the entire vessel. Alarms blared suddenly, piercing the silence. Red warning lights flashed across the control panel inside the cockpit. Jack froze, gripping the satellite's frame tightly as his heart began to race. What the hell? He muttered under his breath. He twisted his head toward the spacecraft, trying to see what was wrong. Smoke curled out of one of the engines, thin tendrils spiraling into the emptiness of space. The tremors turned into violent jerks, throwing Jack off balance. He clung desperately to the satellite, his tether straining against the force pulling him toward the ship. Something was very, very wrong. "Come on, don't do this," Jack whispered, though he knew the machine wouldn't listen. The spacecraft bucked again, this time spinning wildly. Sparks flew from the damaged engine, and the alarms screamed louder than ever. Jack realized with growing dread that the ship was losing stability. If he didn't get back inside soon, he'd be stranded out here or worse, pulled into the wreckage. When it inevitably exploded, summoning every ounce of strength, Jack hauled himself along the tether, hand over hand, until he reached the hatch. He scrambled inside, slamming it shut behind him, just as another violent jolt sent the ship careening sideways. The controls were a mess, buttons flashing erratically, screens displaying incomprehensible error messages. Jack cursed loudly, his fingers flying over the console in a desperate attempt to regain control. "No, no, no," he shouted as the ship continued to spin uncontrollably. "Not today." Despite his efforts, the situation only worsened. The damaged engine sputtered and died completely, leaving the spacecraft adrift. Then, with a deafening roar, the remaining engines failed to. Without propulsion, the ship tumbled helplessly through space. Caught in the gravitational pull of a nearby planet, Jack stared wide-eyed at the view screen as the planet loomed closer, its surface a patchwork of green forests, jagged mountains, and shimmering oceans. There was no time to think, no time to plan. The ship plunged into the atmosphere, heat building rapidly around the hull. Flames licked at the windows, obscuring his vision. For a brief moment, Jack closed his eyes, bracing himself for impact. When he opened them again, everything was chaos. The spacecraft had crashed hard, skidding across uneven terrain before coming to a stop. Smoke filled the cabin, choking him as he struggled to unbuckle himself from the seat. Pain shot through his ribs. He must have hit them during the crash, but he ignored it, focusing instead on survival. Grabbing a small emergency kit from beneath the dashboard, he staggered toward the exit. The door groaned as he pushed it open. revealing a world unlike anything he'd ever seen. Towering trees stretched toward the sky, their leaves glowing faintly in shades of purple and gold. Strange plants swayed gently in the breeze, releasing puffs of sparkling dust into the air. Above, two suns hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. For a moment, Jack forgot about the pain in his side and the destruction of his ship. He stood there, awestruck by the beauty of this alien world. But reality quickly set in. He was stranded, injured, and completely alone. And judging by the thick jungle surrounding him, finding help wouldn't be easy. Taking a deep breath, Jack slung the emergency kit over his shoulder and started walking. The ground beneath his boots was soft, almost spongy, making each step feel unsteady. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of some unknown creature, made him jump. His mind raced with questions. Was anyone else here? Could he survive long enough to signal for rescue? After what felt like hours, Jack stumbled into a clearing. That's when he saw them at first. He thought they were statues, tall figures, clad in gleaming armor, standing perfectly still among the trees. But then one of them moved, her head tilting slightly as she studied him. Her skin shimmered with faint blue markings that pulsed softly, as if alive. She carried a weapon in her hand, sleek and deadly looking, and her eyes glinted with suspicion. Jack raised his hands slowly, palms outward, trying to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said, his voice trembling. "My ship crashed. I need help." The woman said nothing, her expression unreadable. Instead, she signaled to the others, who emerged from the shadows, one by one. They were all female, each radiating strength and confidence. Their armor reflected the fading light of the twin suns, giving them an almost otherworldly appearance. One of them stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. She was taller than the rest, her posture rigid and authoritative. A scar ran diagonally across her cheek, adding to her intimidating demeanor. When she spoke, her words came out sharp and clipped, though Jack couldn't understand the language. "I don't know what you're saying," he stammered, lowering his hand slightly. "Please, I'm lost. My name is Jack." The leader gestured sharply, and two of the warriors approached him. Before Jack could react, they grabbed his arms, forcing him to his knees. Panic surged through him as they bound his wrists with some kind of glowing cord. He tried to struggle, but their grip was ironclad. "Wait, you don't understand. I'm not your enemy," he pleaded, his voice rising in desperation. "I'm just a human." The leader regarded him coolly, her piercing gaze scanning him from head to toe. Finally, she barked in order, and the group began moving, dragging Jack along with them. As they marched through the forest, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into something far beyond his comprehension. These women weren't ordinary. They were warriors, soldiers of some kind, and whatever fate awaited him, he doubted it would be pleasant. Still, as fear gnawed at the edges of his mind, a tiny spark of curiosity flickered to life. Who were these people? Why did they look so different from anything he'd ever encountered? And most importantly, why hadn't they killed him yet? For now, answers would have to wait. All Jack could do was follow and hope for a chance to prove he wasn't the threat they seemed to believe he was. End document. Part 1. Document. Part 2. The forest was alive with sounds: rustling leaves, chirping insects, and the occasional distant roar of some unseen creature. Jack stumbled along, his arms still bound by the glowing cords that seemed to hum faintly against his skin. The warriors moved with precision, their armored boots crunching softly on the uneven ground. They didn't speak, but their body language made it clear they were in control. Jack kept his head down, trying not to provoke them further, though every step sent a jolt of pain through his injured ribs. He glanced up occasionally, catching glimpses of their faces. Each one bore intricate blue markings that shimmered like starlight, patterns unique to each individual. Their armor was sleek and polished, reflecting the dim light filtering through the trees. Despite their intimidating appearance, there was an undeniable grace to their movements, as if they had been trained for years, certious to move like this. Jack couldn't help but feel out of place among them, a clumsy outsider dragged into their world. After what felt like hours of walking, the group finally emerged from the dense jungle. Ahead of them loomed a massive structure carved directly into the side of a mountain. The fortress was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. Its walls were jagged and uneven, blending seamlessly with the natural rock formation. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the edges, pulsing in sync with the markings on the warrior's skin. It looked ancient yet somehow advanced, as if it had been built by a civilization far older than humanity. The leader of the group stopped abruptly and turned to face Jack. Her piercing eyes locked onto his, and for a moment he thought she might say something. Instead, she gestured sharply, and two of her companions pushed him forward. They led him through a towering archway into the heart of the fortress. Inside, the air was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of metal and earth. The corridors twisted and turned, illuminated only by the same glowing symbols etched into the walls. Jack tried to keep track of the path they took, but it was impossible. Every hallway looked the same, lined with more glowing runes and guarded by more warriors stationed at regular intervals. These women watched him pass with cold, unblinking stares, their weapons resting casually at their sides. He swallowed hard, feeling increasingly uneasy with each step. Eventually, they arrived at a large chamber deep within the fortress. The room was circular, its ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. At the center stood a raised platform, surrounded by a ring of glowing crystals that cast eerie shadows across the walls. The leader stepped onto the platform and turned to face Jack, her expression unreadable. She barked a command, and the others forced him to kneel before her. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the glowing runes around them. Jack shifted uncomfortably, his bound hands throbbing where the cords dug into his wrists. Finally, the leader addressed him, her voice sharp and commanding, though he couldn't understand her words. The tone left no room for doubt. She was interrogating him. "I don't know what you're saying," Jack said again, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. My ship crashed, and I need help." The leader tilted her head, her glowing markings flaring brighter for a moment. She exchanged a few quick words with one of her subordinates, who nodded and stepped forward. This warrior carried a device in her hand, a small, metallic orb that hovered just above her palm. She activated it with a flick of her finger, and a beam of light shot out, scanning Jack from head to toe. Jack flinched, instinctively pulling away. "What is that thing? What are you doing?" The leader ignored his protests, watching intently as the orb completed its scan. When it finished, the device emitted a series of beeps before projecting a holographic image into the air. It showed a crude representation of Jack's body, highlighting areas of injury and displaying strange symbols that likely meant something to the warriors. One of them pointed to the image and spoke rapidly, gesturing toward Jack's ribs. "They can see I'm hurt," Jack muttered under his breath. "Great. Maybe they'll patch me up before deciding what to do with me." The leader studied the hologram for a moment longer, then dismissed the subordinate with a wave of her hand. She turned her attention back to Jack, her expression hardening. She pointed to herself and said a single word, "Lyra." Jack blinked, unsure how to respond. Then it clicked, she was introducing herself. Slowly, cautiously, he nodded. "Lyra," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "My name is Jack." Lyra's brow furrowed, and she leaned closer, studying him with renewed interest. She said something else, her tone softer this time, almost curious. Jack shook his head helplessly. "I don't understand. I'm sorry." Frustration flickered across Lyra's face, but she quickly masked it. She signaled to one of the other warriors, who stepped forward carrying a tablet-like device. She tapped on it several times, and suddenly, Jack heard a mechanical voice speaking in halting, broken English. "You, human?" the voice asked. Jack's eyes widened in surprise. Yes, I'm human, from Earth," the warrior relayed this information to Lyra, who listened intently. She responded with a string of questions, which the device translated clumsily. "Why? Come here, spy, invader." "No," Jack exclaimed, shaking his head vigorously. "I told you, I crashed. My ship malfunctioned. I didn't mean to come here." Lyra frowned, clearly unconvinced. She exchanged a few more words with her subordinates, who murmured amongst themselves. Jack caught snippets of phrases he couldn't understand, but the tone suggested they were debating something. He glanced around nervously, wondering what decision they would reach and whether it would mean life or death for him. Finally, Lyra stepped down from the platform and approached him. She crouched low, bringing herself to eye level with him. Her glowing markings pulsed rhythmically, casting shifting patterns of light across her face. Up close, Jack could see the scars etched into her skin, not just the one on her cheek, but smaller ones along her neck and arms. They told a story of battles fought and survived, of a life shaped by conflict. "You stay," Lyra said, her accent thick but understandable. "We watch." Before Jack could respond, she stood and motioned for her warriors to take him away. They hauled him to his feet and led him out of the chamber, back into the twisting corridors of the fortress. This time, they brought him to a small cell carved into the rock. The door slid shut behind him with a heavy thud, leaving him alone in near darkness. Jack slumped against the wall, his mind racing. He had survived the crash, endured capture by these mysterious warriors, and even managed to communicate a little with their leader. But now what? Were they going to imprison him indefinitely? Torture him for information? Or worse? As he sat there, nursing his injuries and trying to make sense of everything, he noticed something strange. The glowing cords binding his wrists had begun to fade, their light dimming until they vanished completely. Jack flexed his fingers experimentally, surprised to find that the restraints were gone. Had they trusted him enough to remove them, or had they simply forgotten? Before he could dwell on it too long, the door to his cell slid open again. A young warrior stood in the doorway, her posture less rigid than the others. Her markings were simpler, less elaborate, suggesting she might be lower in rank. She held a tray of food in her hands and extended it toward him cautiously. "Eat," she said, her voice soft but firm. Jack hesitated for a moment, then accepted the tray. The food consisted of unfamiliar fruits and what looked like strips of dried meat. He sniffed it cautiously before taking a bite. To his relief, it tasted fine-earthy and slightly sweet, though nothing like the meals he was used to back home. "Thank you," he said, meeting her gaze. She nodded once, her expression unreadable, before turning to leave. Just as she reached the doorway, Jack called out to her. "Wait, what's your name?" She paused, glancing over her shoulder. After a moment's hesitation, she replied, "Kayla." "Kayla," Jack repeated, committing the name to memory. "I'm Jack." Kayla gave him a small nod before disappearing down the corridor, leaving him alone once more. As he ate, Jack found himself replaying the encounter in his mind. There was something different about Kayla's, something softer, kinder than the others. Maybe it was the way she had spoken to him, or the fact that she had bothered to tell him her name. Whatever it was, it gave him a glimmer of hope, for the first time since the crash. Jack allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he might survive this after all. Asterisk, asterisk, end document, part 2, asterisk, asterisk. Document, part 3. Days passed in the dim confines of Jack's cell. The routine was predictable, almost monotonous. Kayla would visit twice a day, bringing him food and water. She rarely spoke, but her presence alone was enough to ease some of the tension that had settled over Jack like a heavy blanket. He began to look forward to her visits, not just for the sustenance she brought, but for the small sense of connection they offered. Even though their interactions were brief, Jack felt a quiet bond forming between them, a fragile thread of trust in an otherwise hostile environment. During the long hours alone, Jack tried to piece together what he knew about these women. They called themselves the Zaira. He learned from snippets of conversation overheard through the walls. Their glowing markings weren't just decorative. They seemed to serve some kind of purpose, perhaps even tied to their health or emotions. The fortress itself was ancient, its design both beautiful and functional, blending seamlessly with the mountain it was carved into. It all hinted at a culture rich in history and tradition, one that had thrived long before humans ever ventured into space. But there was still so much Jack didn't understand. Why had they taken him captive instead of simply killing him? What did they want from him? And why did Lyra seem so conflicted whenever she looked at him? One evening, as Jack sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, Kayla entered his cell carrying her usual tray. This time, however, she lingered longer than usual. Instead of leaving immediately after handing him the food, she crouched down beside him, her expression thoughtful. "You different," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack raised an eyebrow, unsure how to respond. "Different? From who? From others?" She gestured vaguely, as if referring to people beyond the fortress walls. "You. Not fight, not lie." It wasn't exactly praise, but Jack took it as a compliment anyway. "I'm just trying to survive," he replied. "Like anyone else." Kayla nodded, though her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were weighing his words. After a moment, she leaned closer, glancing toward the doorway to ensure no one was watching. Her next sentence came out in a rush, spoken so softly Jack had to strain to hear it. "They think you special." "Special?" Jack echoed, frowning. "What do you mean?" Kayla hesitated, her fingers tracing patterns on the floor. "Old story. Prophecy. Outsider comes. Changes everything." Jack stared at her, stunned. "A prophecy? About me?" She shrugged, clearly uncomfortable discussing it further. "Some believe, others not." Before Jack could press her for more details, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Kayla stiffened, then stood abruptly, grabbing the empty tray. Without another word, she slipped out of the cell, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts. The idea of a prophecy unsettled him. He wasn't a believer in fate or destiny. Those were concepts reserved for movies and books, not real life. But here, surrounded by alien warriors, who wore glowing markings and lived in a fortress older than time itself, anything seemed possible. Could it be true? Was he really part of some ancient prediction, destined to play a role in their world? Over the next few days, Jack noticed subtle changes in the way the Zaira treated him. While most of the warriors remained distant and wary, a handful began to regard him with curiosity rather than hostility. Some even whispered to each other when they thought he wasn't listening, their glowing markings flaring brighter as they spoke. It was as if Kella's words had sparked something, a ripple of doubt, spreading through their ranks. Then came the night when everything changed. Jack was lying on the hard floor, staring up at the faintly glowing runes etched into the ceiling, when the door to his cell slid open unexpectedly. At first, he thought it was Kayla returning for another visit. But when he sat up, he saw that it wasn't her, it was Lyra. The commander stepped inside, her armor gleaming in the low light. Unlike during their previous encounters, she wasn't accompanied by guards. For once, they were alone. Jack scrambled to his feet, unsure whether to feel relieved or terrified. "Lyra," he said cautiously. "What's going on?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him intently, her glowing markings pulsing steadily. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "You ask questions. Many questions. Many questions." Jack nodded slowly. "I'm curious. I don't know much about your people or why I'm here. Lyra tilted her head, considering this. You say truth. You not spy, not invader. That's right, Jack replied quickly. I'm just a human, an engineer. I fix things, that's all. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, she looked almost troubled. Then she gestured for him to follow her. Jack hesitated, glancing toward the open door. Was this a trick? A trap? But there was something in Lyra's demeanor, unspoken promise, that she wouldn't harm him that made him decide to trust her. They walked in silence through the twisting corridors of the fortress, passing glowing runes and armed warriors who watched them pass with unreadable expressions. Eventually, they arrived at a chamber Jack hadn't seen before. Unlike the rest of the fortress, which was utilitarian and stark, this room was filled with intricate carvings and murals, depicting scenes of battle and triumph. In the center stood a massive stone tablet, covered in symbols that glowed faintly, casting a soft blue light across the space. Lyra approached the tablet and placed her hand on its surface. The glow intensified, illuminating the carvings in greater detail. Jack stepped closer, his eyes widening as he realized what he was looking at. The images told a story, one of war, loss, and eventual salvation. Near the bottom of the tablet, he spotted something that made his breath catch. A figure standing among the Zaire, its form unmistakably human. That's me, Jack asked, pointing to the carving. Lyra nodded. Prophecy. Outsider brings unity, brings victory. Jack shook his head, disbelief warring with awe. This can't be real. I'm nobody. I'm not a leader. I'm just a guy who fixes satellites. Lyra's gaze hardened. You here, you chosen, that enough. Before Jack could argue further, a commotion erupted outside the chamber. Raised voices echoed through the halls, growing louder with each passing second. Lyra turned sharply, her hand moving instinctively to the weapon strapped to her side. Moments later, a group of warriors burst into the room, led by a tall, imposing figure with fiery red markings blazing across her skin. Varen, Lyra growled, stepping protectively in front of Jack. Varen sneered, her eyes narrowing as they landed on him. He stays. After what we saw. Lies. Lyra. All lies. Lyra's jaw tightened, but she stood her ground. He speaks truth. Prophecy clear. Prophecy. Old Varen shot back. We need strength, not weakness. Not him. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Jack glanced between the two women, feeling like a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. Whatever conflict existed between them, it ran deep and he was caught squarely in the middle. Finally, Lyra stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. Enough, we test him. Trials, prove worth. Varen's expression darkened, but she didn't argue further. With a final glare at Jack, she turned and stormed out of the chamber, her followers trailing behind her. Once they were gone, Lyra turned back to Jack, her expression unreadable. Tomorrow, she said simply. Trials begin. Jack swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. Whatever these trials entailed, he knew one thing for certain: his survival and, possibly, the fate of the Zara depended on passing them. End document. Part 3. Document. Part 4. The morning arrived too soon for Jack. He barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts of the trials ahead. What did they involve? Physical challenges, mental puzzles, or something else entirely? He had no way of knowing, and that uncertainty gnawed at him like a persistent ache. When the door to his cell slid open, he wasn't surprised to see Kayla standing there, her expression unreadable. Time, she said simply, stepping aside to let him pass. Jack nodded, steeling himself as he followed her into the corridor. The fortress was eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by an almost oppressive stillness. Warriors watched him from the shadows, their glowing markings flickering faintly in the dim light. Some looked curious, others hostile, but none offered any words of encouragement or warning. They led him to a large arena, carved into the heart of the mountain. The space was circular, with high walls lined with glowing runes that pulsed rhythmically, casting shifting patterns of light across the ground. At the center stood Lyra, flanked by several senior warriors, including Varan. Her fiery red markings seemed even brighter today, burning with barely contained anger. Jack swallowed hard as he approached them. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice steadier than he expected. Lyra gestured toward the arena floor. "Trials test strength, skill, mind. You prove worth." Varan smirked, crossing her arms over her chest. "He fail. Weak human." Ignoring her, Lyra raised her hand, signaling for silence. "First trial, combat." Jack's stomach sank. Combat against these highly trained warriors. He glanced around nervously, spotting a rack of weapons along one wall. Swords, spears, and strange devices he couldn't identify rested there, gleaming menacingly under the pulsing lights. "You fight," Lyra continued. "Not kill. Show courage." Before Jack could protest, a warrior stepped forward, holding a short staff in her hands. She tossed it to him, and he caught it awkwardly. It felt foreign in his grip, its weight unfamiliar. Across the arena, another warrior moved to face him, a tall, muscular woman with sharp green markings that glowed fiercely. She carried a similar staff, twirling it effortlessly as she took her position. Jack's heart raced. He wasn't a fighter. Back on Earth, he avoided conflict whenever possible, but here, surrounded by expectant eyes, he had no choice. Taking a deep breath, he tightened his grip on the staff and raised it defensively. The warrior lunged at him without warning, her movements swift and precise. Jack barely managed to block her first strike, the impact vibrating painfully through his arms. She came at him again, pressing her advantage, forcing him to stumble backward. Each blow pushed him closer to the edge of the arena, his footing uncertain on the uneven ground. He tried to counterattack, swinging the staff clumsily, but she dodged with ease, her laughter ringing out mockingly. Sweat dripped down his face as exhaustion began to set in. His ribs ached where he'd injured them during the crash, making every movement harder than it should have been. Just when he thought he couldn't hold on any longer, inspiration struck. Instead of trying to match her speed or strength, he focused on reading her movements. She attacked in predictable patterns, favoring quick strikes, followed by feints. Using this knowledge, Jack timed his blocks carefully, creating openings he could exploit. When she lunged again, he sidestepped instead of blocking, letting her momentum carry her past him. In one fluid motion, he spun and tapped her lightly on the back with the end of his staff. The crowd gasped, and even the warrior paused, surprised by his maneuver. Lyra nodded approvingly. "Good. Next." The second trial awaited him, a labyrinthine course designed to test agility and problem-solving. Jack entered a narrow tunnel, filled with obstacles, swinging blades, collapsing floors, and walls that shifted unpredictably. The goal was simple: reach the other side as quickly as possible. At first, Jack struggled. The swinging blades forced him to duck and weave, his body moving instinctively to avoid injury. When he reached the section with the shifting walls, he froze, unsure how to proceed. The walls moved in patterns, closing off pathways only to reopen them moments later. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Closing his eyes briefly, he listened to the mechanical whirring of the walls. There was a rhythm to their movements, a pattern he could decipher if he paid close attention. Opening his eyes again, he timed his steps carefully, slipping through gaps just as they appeared. By the time he emerged on the other side, his clothes were torn, and his hands were scraped raw. But he had made it. Kayla greeted him at the exit, her expression softening slightly. "Clever," she murmured, before leading him to the final trial. This last challenge was unlike the others. It took place in a darkened chamber, illuminated only by floating orbs of light suspended in midair. Symbols glowed faintly on the walls, forming intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as Jack studied them. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, atop which rested a crystal shard pulsing with a faint blue glow. Lyra explained the task. Solve puzzle, light path, take shard. Jack approached the pedestal cautiously, examining the symbols around him. They reminded him of circuit diagrams, patterns of energy flow that needed to be aligned correctly. Focusing intently, he began tracing the connections between the symbols, identifying which ones linked together logically. Time seemed to blur as he worked, his fingers brushing against the glowing runes to activate them in sequence. One by one, the floating orbs brightened, casting beams of light that connected to form a pathway leading to the pedestal. When the final orb lit up, the crystal shard rose into the air, hovering above the pedestal, as if waiting for him. Reaching out, Jack grasped the shard, feeling a surge of warmth radiate through his hand. The crowd erupted into murmurs of surprise, and even Varen looked momentarily impressed, though she quickly masked it with a scowl. Lyra stepped forward, her expression solemn. You pass, prove worth. Veyron snorted, turning away dismissively. Luck? Nothing more. But Jack noticed something different in the eyes of the other warriors. Respect. For the first time since his arrival, they didn't see him as a helpless outsider. They saw potential. As Kayla escorted him back to his cell, Jack allowed himself a small smile. He had survived the trials and earned a measure of trust from the Zyra. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he was ready to face it. *** End. Document. Part 4. ***. Document. Part 5. The days following the trials were a blur of activity and tension. Jack's success had earned him a grudging respect from some of the Zarya, but it also stirred up deeper divisions within their ranks. The fortress buzzed, with whispered debates, arguments that spilled into corridors and training grounds. Some warriors believed Jack's performance in the trials proved he was part of the prophecy, while others led by Veyron dismissed his achievements as mere luck or clever tricks unworthy of their trust. Jack noticed the change immediately. While some warriors greeted him with nods of acknowledgement, others glared at him with open hostility. Meals brought to his cell were inconsistent. Sometimes they came from Kayla, who offered small smiles and quiet words of encouragement, but other times they arrived cold and hastily prepared, clearly delivered by someone who resented his presence. It was clear that opinions about him were split, and the rift was growing wider. One evening, as twilight painted the twin suns in hues of orange and purple, Jack was summoned to the main chamber once again. This time Lyra stood alone, her glowing markings dimmer than usual, as if reflecting her inner turmoil. She gestured for him to sit on a low stone bench near the center of the room, then paced slowly before speaking. You passed trials, she began, her voice steady, but tinged with uncertainty. But not all agree. I guessed that much, Jack replied, rubbing his sore hands. Varen doesn't like me. Lyra stopped pacing and turned to face him. Varen fears change. Fears outsider. Many feel same, and you? Jack asked cautiously. What do you think? Her gaze softened slightly, though her expression remained guarded. I see strength. I see cleverness. But strength alone, not enough. You must earn loyalty. Jack nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Loyalty wasn't something given freely among the Zyra. It had to be earned through action, not just words or feats. He leaned forward slightly, his tone earnest. Tell me what I need to do. I'll prove myself. Lyra studied him for a long moment, her glowing markings flaring faintly, before settling back into their usual rhythm. Finally, she spoke. Warriors watch, learn, show them why prophecy speaks true. With that, she dismissed him, leaving Jack to ponder her cryptic advice. As he made his way back to his cell, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was testing him not just physically or mentally, but emotionally. Trust, he realized, was the key to winning over the Zaira. And trust wasn't built overnight. Over the next few days, Jack threw himself into learning everything he could about the Zaira. He observed their routines, listened to their conversations, even when he didn't fully understand them, and paid close attention to their interactions. Slowly, patterns emerged. The Zaira valued discipline, honor, and unity above all else. Every action they took from combat training to meal preparation was done with precision and purpose. Even their glowing markings served a dual role, acting as both identifiers and indicators of health or emotional state. Kayla became his unofficial guide, answering his questions whenever she could without drawing suspicion. She explained that the glowing runes etched into the fortress walls weren't just decorative, they told stories, chronicling battles fought and lessons learned. She showed him how to read basic symbols, teaching him phrases like strength through unity and light guides truth. Though the language was complex, Jack absorbed every word eagerly, determined to bridge the gap between their worlds. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Warriors who had once ignored him began to acknowledge his presence, nodding respectfully as they passed. During communal meals, a few even sat near him, engaging in halting conversations, using gestures and broken English. One warrior, a younger woman named Taya, surprised him by asking about Earth. Her curiosity was genuine, and Jack found himself describing skyscrapers, oceans, and forests in vivid detail, painting pictures of a world vastly different from theirs. But not everyone warmed to him. Varan continued to oppose him openly, challenging his presence at every turn. During training sessions, she would often pair him with the most skilled fighters, pushing him to his limits. At first Jack struggled, his body still recovering from the trials. But each failure taught him something new: how to anticipate an opponent's move, how to conserve energy, how to adapt. Over time, he grew stronger, faster, more confident. It wasn't just physical challenges that tested him. The Zaira placed great importance on mental resilience, often presenting warriors with puzzles or ethical dilemmas designed to sharpen their judgment. When Jack was included in these exercises, he approached them with the same determination he'd shown during the trials, whether it was solving a riddle or mediating a dispute between two warriors. He relied on logic and empathy, earning praise from unexpected quarters. Even Lyra seemed to soften toward him, though her demeanor remained formal. On one occasion, she invited him to join a strategy session, where warriors discussed tactics for defending the fortress against potential threats. Jack listened intently, offering insights based on his engineering background. When he suggested reinforcing certain weak points in the outer walls, several warriors nodded approvingly, including Lyra herself. Despite these small victories, Jack knew he hadn't won everyone over yet. Varine's faction remained vocal in their opposition, accusing him of manipulating the prophecy for personal gain. Their accusations stung, not because they were entirely false. Jack couldn't deny that surviving meant proving the prophecy right, but because they highlighted the lingering mistrust he faced. One night, unable to sleep, Jack wandered the fortress corridors, seeking solace in its quiet beauty. The glowing runes cast soft light on the stone walls, creating an almost hypnotic effect. As he rounded a corner, he nearly collided with Kayla, who was standing near a mural depicting a battle scene. "Hey," he said softly, startled. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." Kayla shook her head, stepping aside to let him approach. "No interrupt, just thinking." Jack glanced at the mural, recognizing familiar imagery from the prophecy tablet. About the prophecy. She hesitated, then nodded. Some believe, some fear, hard to know truth. Jack sighed, leaning against the wall beside her. "I don't know if I'm really part of this prophecy or not. All I know is that I want to help. These people you are worth fighting for." Kayla looked at him, her glowing markings pulsing gently. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, she said. You brave. Braver than many. Her words caught him off guard. Thanks, he murmured, unsure how else to respond. But bravery isn't enough. Not here. No, Kayla agreed. But start. Good start. As they stood there together, bathed in the soft glow of the runes, Jack felt a spark of hope. He might not have convinced everyone yet, but he was making progress. And in a place where trust was hard won, that was no small feat. End document. Part 5. Document. Part 6. Tensions within the fortress reached a breaking point one evening, as whispers of rebellion echoed through its stone corridors. Varian's faction had grown bolder, their voices louder and more insistent. They accused Jack of being a fraud, a manipulator who sought to undermine the Xyrus traditions for his own gain. To them, he was not the fulfillment of prophecy, but a dangerous outsider who threatened everything they held sacred. Jack sensed the shift in the air, long before it erupted into chaos. The once neutral glances from some warriors turned icy, their glowing markings dimming whenever he passed. Meals became sparse again, delivered with barely concealed disdain. Even Kayla seemed quieter, her visits less frequent, as if she feared being associated too closely with him. It was clear that trouble was brewing, and there was little Jack could do to stop it. The confrontation came during a gathering in the main chamber. Warriors crowded around the central platform, their murmurs rising like a storm. Lyra stood at the forefront, her posture rigid and commanding, while Varen paced angrily nearby. Jack entered hesitantly, aware of the hostile stares, following him as he moved to stand near the edge of the crowd. Varen wasted no time. She stepped forward, pointing an accusing finger at Jack. "This human weakens us," she declared, her voice ringing out sharply. "He tricks us with clever words and false victories. He is not chosen, he is a liar." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, and Jack felt a lump rise in his throat. He glanced at Lyra, hoping for support, but her expression remained unreadable. Her markings pulsed faintly, betraying her inner conflict. "He has proven himself," Lyra countered, her tone firm. "Trials show strength. Actions earn respect." "Respect," Varen spat, stepping closer. "For what? For breaking our ways. For bringing doubt among us." The argument escalated quickly, with voices rising on both sides. Some warriors sided with Varen, shouting accusations and demanding Jack's exile. Others defended him, citing his bravery and ingenuity during the trials. The chamber descended into chaos, the sound of clashing opinions filling the space like thunder. Jack tried to speak, to defend himself, but his voice was drowned out by the noise. Frustration welled up inside him as he realized how powerless he truly was. These were not his people. This was not his world. No matter how hard he tried, he would always be seen as an outsider by some. Finally, Lyra raised her hand, silencing the room with a sharp gesture. "Enough," she commanded, her voice cutting through the din. When the murmurs faded, she turned to Jack, her gaze piercing. "You have earned chance, but trust fragile. One wrong step." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken consequences. Jack nodded, understanding the gravity of her warning. He had walked a fine line since arriving here, balancing between proving himself and respecting their customs. Now, that line felt thinner than ever. Before anything else could be said, Varen stepped forward again, her fiery markings blazing brighter than before. "No more chances," she growled. "We act now." With that, she signaled to her followers, who surged forward, surrounding Jack. Panic flared in Jack's chest as hands grabbed him, pulling him toward the exit. He struggled instinctively, but the warriors were too strong, their grip unrelenting. Over their shoulders, he caught glimpses of Lyra watching silently, her expression conflicted. For a moment, he thought she might intervene, but she didn't. As they dragged him through the fortress, Jack's mind raced. Was this the end? Would they banish him more worse? The thought of being cast out onto the alien planet alone filled him with dread. He had survived so much already, only to face this betrayal now. When they reached the fortress gates, Kayla appeared suddenly, stepping into their path. Her presence startled even Veyron, who paused mid-step. "Stop," Kayla said firmly, her voice carrying an authority that belied her youth. Veyron scowled. "Move aside, Kayla. This does not concern you. It concerns all of us." Kayla shot back, her glowing markings flaring defiantly. "Prophecy speaks truth. You know it. This is not prophesied as weakness." Veyron snapped. "And you shame yourself by defending him." Kayla's jaw tightened, but she didn't back down. Instead, she turned to Jack, meeting his eyes with a mixture of determination and sorrow. "Go," she urged softly. "Survive. Prove them wrong." For a moment, Jack hesitated, torn between gratitude and despair. Then, summoning every ounce of courage, he twisted free from his captor's grasp and bolted toward the gate. The warriors shouted angrily, giving chase, but Kayla blocked their path, buying him precious seconds. As he sprinted into the dense forest beyond the fortress, he heard her voice echo faintly behind him. "Trust in yourself, Jack." The jungle swallowed him whole, its towering trees and glowing plants casting eerie shadows in the fading light of the twin suns. Jack ran blindly, his heart pounding as adrenaline coursed through his veins. Every step jarred his injured ribs, sending waves of pain through his body, but he pushed on, knowing that stopping meant capture or worse. Eventually, exhaustion forced him to slow. He collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath, his clothes torn and dirt-streaked. The forest was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife replaced by an unsettling stillness. Jack scanned his surroundings warily, half expecting Varine's warriors to emerge from the shadows at any moment. But they didn't come. Instead, silence settled over him, broken only by the distant hum of glowing plants and the occasional rustle of leaves. Jack leaned back against the tree, closing his eyes as reality sank in. He was alone again, just as he had been after the crash. Only this time, it wasn't just survival. He had to worry about Tit was clearing his name and proving that he belonged. As night fell, the forest came alive with soft luminescence. Strange insects fluttered past, their wings shimmering like tiny stars. Above, the sky stretched endlessly, dotted with unfamiliar constellations. Jack stared upward, searching for something familiar reminder of Earth, of home, but all he saw were patterns he didn't recognize, symbols that seemed almost purposeful. Then it hit him, the prophecy, back in the fortress. He had studied the carvings and murals, piecing together fragments of the story. Outsider arrives, brings unity, leads to victory. Those constellations overhead, they matched the designs etched into the prophecy tablet. They weren't random. They were a map. A surge of determination washed over him. If the prophecy was reland, if he truly was part of it, then he couldn't give up now. Not when so much was at stake. Pushing himself to his feet, Jack resolved to find answers. Somewhere out there, hidden in the wilderness or buried beneath ancient ruins, lay the key to proving his worth, not just to the Zaira, but to himself. With renewed purpose, he set off into the forest, guided by the glowing constellations above. Each step took him farther from the fortress, deeper into the unknown. But for the first time since his arrival, Jack felt a flicker of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't face them alone. Kayla believed in him, and that belief was enough to keep him moving forward. End document, Part 6.